In the Mouth of Madness was released in 1994 and was directed by John Carpenter, and it stars Sam Neill, Julie Carmen, Jurgen Prochnow, and Charlton Heston, and follows an insurance investigator who visits a small town while looking into the disappearance of a successful horror author and begins to question his sanity as the lines between reality and fiction seem to blur. Welcome back, everyone, to another Halloween review, and I'm really excited to dive deep into this one because In the Mouth of Madness might actually be my favorite film of John Carpenter's, and it's also one that I feel like doesn't get brought up enough when it comes to his filmography. Everyone loves and praises his work in the 70s and 80s, and although his work does take a dip in the 90s, he still managed to crank out this film, which is stylish, haunting, and just a really fun movie to watch. And since its release has garnered a well-deserved cult following, and I've been meaning to talk about this film for several years now, ever since I saw it for the first time, and I thought now would be the perfect time. So sit back and let's talk about In the Mouth of Madness. But before we get into all that, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. Producer Michael DeLuca originally wrote the script in the late 80s and initially went to John Carpenter to direct the film, but he passed on the project. In 1989, New Line Cinema announced production on the film with director Tony Randall set to direct, and at one point Mary Lambert, the director of Pet Sematary, was even set to direct. But finally, Carpenter signed on to direct the movie in December of '92, and filming began a year later and lasted from August to October of 1993. The town scenes in the fictional town of Hobbs End were filmed on Main Street, Unionville, and the exteriors for the Black Church were filmed at the Cathedral of Transfiguration, both of which were located in Markham, Ontario. The rest of the movie would be shot on location in Toronto due to its unique mix of New York skyscrapers and New England remoteness. The visual effects for the film were done by Industrial Light and Magic, and the practical effects, which included creature prosthetics and animatronics, were done by KMB EFX Group. It took 7 weeks for KMB to create the practical effects for the film, the biggest being an 18-foot wall of monsters mounted on rollers and operated by a crew of 25 people. The monsters for the film had to be outrageous demons inspired by Lovecraftian horror. But most of the time in Lovecraft stories, the monsters are so horrible and beyond human comprehension that they can't be described. So they worked on trying to describe the indescribable. Obviously, In the Mouth of Madness is influenced heavily by the works of H.P. Lovecraft, with many references to his stories and themes, and the title of the film itself taken from Lovecraft's own story, At the Mountains of Madness. The film is structured like a Lovecraftian story, with a prologue that takes place in the present, and the majority of the story after is told in flashback. The film has many other references, down to the title of Sutter Kane's books in the film, sounding like Lovecraftian stories. In the Mouth of Madness was released worldwide on February the 3rd of 1995, and on a budget of $8 million, only made back $8.9 million, making it a box office failure. Reviews for the film didn't help, with many critics feeling mixed on the entire film. The technical aspects of the movie, such as the special effects, were praised, as well as the acting, directing, but believed the film was too complicated, confusing, and pretentious. However, since its initial release, the film has developed a cult following and gained more positive reviews in the years since its release, and has become more of an underrated horror film to watch during the Halloween season. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go into my thoughts on the film. Right off the bat, In the Mouth of Madness is my kind of movie. I'm so fascinated by the idea of cosmic horror, despite not really delving too much into it. I haven't read any of the works of H.P. Lovecraft, nor have I watched many movies inspired by his works, aside from this film. One of the only things I have to judge cosmic horror off of is the FromSoft game Bloodborne, which is heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. But other than that, this is all I've been exposed to, and I really wish we had more high-profile cosmic horror movies now. And a film like this shows that in the right hands, it can work and be very effective. I want to start off by talking about Carpenter's direction in this film. In all of his movies, at least the horror-related ones, he's so good at building atmosphere, from the way he places the camera to the imagery, smoke, and finally the music. In the Mouth of Madness, for me, has all of the trappings of classic Carpenter, with a film that looks as stunning as it does haunting. The opening scenes in the psychiatric ward is just an example of how Carpenter gets that unsettling feeling just from the start, from the wide shot of the building itself set atop a hill to the long labyrinthian hallways. It reminds me of some of the otherworldly production design of silent horror films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Then we get to our locations in Hobbs End, which is just a beautiful small little town that's completely empty, aside for a few townsfolk here and there, and at the center is the Black Church, which feels so otherworldly in a small town like Hobbs End. And when you go inside it, it feels like you've entered another time period. I love things like that in this movie, where locations feel like characters, and a lot of that is brought through the direction, production design, and the camera work. The music is also unsettling at times and sharp, and other times it's devoid of music entirely, and those add to some of the film's more chilling moments. Where I think the film also shines are the characters and performances. Sam Neill is wonderfully cast as John Trent, the insurance investigator who turns from a skeptic who believes the disappearance of Sutter Kane, the author of The Mouth of Madness, to be a huge publicity stunt, only to come out of the film completely mad and realizing that the end of the world is at hand, and the words of Sutter Kane in his books are being voiced by ancient Lovecraftian beings. It's so interesting and disturbing, the thought of impending doom, and I think Sam Neill plays it so well. A straight man that completely becomes unhinged by the film's events. He plays it so well. My favorite moment of his has to be when he just completely loses it on a bus and yells in total fear, and obviously the ending, where he discovers himself to be a work of Sutter Kane. And that realization for him is humorous, satisfying, and haunting all the same. I also want to bring up other performances I really enjoy, or at least left an impression on me, such as Julie Carmen as Linda Stiles, Sutter Kane's editor. She joins Sam Neill on the journey to Hobbs End, and she starts noticing the weirdness of the situation, while Sam Neill's character is left oblivious up until the end, though. This is a really fun character, and a tragic one as well, as she learns quickly she is at the mercy of Sutter Kane. And speaking of, let's bring him up. Jurgen Prochnow plays the author, Sutter Kane, who is literally writing what the old ones are having him write, that are going to kickstart the end of the world. They do such a great job in the beginning of the film setting up the mystery of who Sutter Kane is. A reclusive author that can literally get into the mind of his readers, causing them to go insane through the guidance of these Lovecraftian beings. And we don't even get our first glance at Kane until the midpoint of the movie. And even then, it takes even longer for our characters to even have a conversation with him. But when that happens, Jurgen Prochnow kills it by being both mysterious and really threatening, and plays so well against Sam Neill. Other performances I enjoy, such as Charlton Heston as Sutter Kane's publisher, and Frances Bay as Mrs. Pickman, a sweet old lady who owns a town inn, but holds a dark secret, or Willem von Homburg, who's probably best known for playing Vigo the Carpathian in Ghostbusters 2. The film even has Hayden Christensen making his film debut. What I'm saying is everyone does a really good job in the film and is memorable in some way. Next, I want to talk about the script and the story itself, which is an aspect that works in the film's favor and also kind of makes it fall apart in some places. First off, I'll say, as a whole, I love this film's script. I think the ideas presented are so interesting. The characters are vividly brought to life, but it's not without some of its flaws, which I want to get into. But first, I want to praise the stuff I do love. I love how DeLuca's script really makes you feel unsettled, and you can tell he has a love and appreciation for the works his story is influenced by. And I just think how a lot of the film starts out as a simple detective story that inflates into a story about the end of the world and mind control. The idea of the power of a good story and how it can influence people to do terrible things is a point that should be discussed more, and the idea that, in a way, Sutter Kane is playing God by controlling people through his stories, including our main characters, is what makes this movie so unique and special to me. Where it falls apart, though, is simply due to the fact Michael DeLuca's script is just not all that polished. He's a producer first and foremost, and he has great ideas that maybe do feel a little crowded in the film. There's also moments in the middle of the film where there's a lot of downtime, and our characters are just kind of wandering about aimlessly without much in the way of a goal to drive them through the second half of the story. I think the first half of the movie is overall just stronger than its second half, and despite all the great ideas and haunting effects and great twists, it doesn't always work cohesively. But what is there is interesting enough to lead to a satisfying climax that I might not fully understand, but I know I liked it. Another small complaint I have with the film, and it's a very minor one, but sometimes I noticed more than once Sam Neill would drop out of his American accent and use his actual accent, and it was just very weird to me. Oh, and before I forget, I do have to mention the music, which is really good. John Carpenter is no stranger to a good soundtrack. But I think him and Jim Lang, his collaborator on this movie, ended up making a score that's haunting and thrilling, and the opening and closing theme may feel out of place with the rest of the film, being heavily inspired by Metallica's Enter Sandman, but it's so good and a memorable way to bookend the film. I also have to give credit to the effects and creature designs that are perfectly otherworldly and grotesque in the best ways. I also love the metaphorical use of a chained-up door that is keeping the old ones at bay until they are released onto the world. In the Mouth of Madness is not a perfect movie. It has a script that has many flaws, but it's made up for by so many great ideas that I think are at least executed well and as intended. It's unsettling and just a fun movie to watch, with interesting characters and performances and ideas that are really different from other horror films we had in the past and even since. I love In the Mouth of Madness. It's my favorite work of Carpenter's, and an underrated one at that. And it's one I always love revisiting this time of year. It really has gotten better with each watch, and I find myself appreciating more and more things about it. And with all that said, I'm going to give In the Mouth of Madness an 8 out of 10. If you have not seen In the Mouth of Madness, I highly recommend that you give it a watch sometime. It's a very underrated Carpenter film, and I think it needs to be given some recognition. It's a little clumsy in its script, but everything else makes up for it, in my opinion, and I left the movie wanting more movies like this with this kind of horror. But I want to thank you all for tuning in once again to this Halloween review, and look forward to next week when we look at the first film in a franchise that just recently received its 10th entry. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And stay positive.